Hey guys, for the next couple of minutes, we are going to talk about political philosophies that shaped the development of the United States constitutional government. So, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to analyze the key ideas of limited government and the rule of law as seen in the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights. We're also going to analyze the impact of the writings of Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Baron de Montesquieu, and how they impacted our concept of government here in the United States. And last, we're going to analyze the ways that these philosophies influenced the writers of the Declaration of Independence. But first off, what we need to do is before we can analyze these key ideas of limited government and the rule of law, we've got to know what they are. So let's look at what limited government are. Let's also look at rule of law and a couple of other things. Based on your knowledge, what is limited government? Yes, it ultimately means that the government does not have too much power. The only power that it has are those given by the people through laws. And those laws, as it relates to the United States, would be those that are found in the United States Constitution. Now, speaking of law, what is known as the rule of law? Or what is the rule of law? Now, the definition is a principle that all people and institutions, also government, are subject and accountable to law that is fairly applied and enforced. This is the principle of government by law. So it's not government by somebody's whims or desires. This is a set of rules that determines how a government governs. So speaking of government, what is the concept of government? Just overall. Yeah, government is an entity or a group, but an organization that sets and administers public policy or laws and exercises executive, political, and sovereign power through customs, institutions, and laws within a country, state, or locality. Now, speaking of government, what is the U.S. concept of government? I will tell you that nobody stated the U.S. concept of government better than Abraham Lincoln did in his Gettysburg Address, where he referred to the United States government as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's the U.S. concept of government. All right, well, let's get into the documents that help shape what we know as the United States government today. The Magna Carta, written in 1215. This was known as the Great Charter, and it was signed by King John. And it was a document that the feudal barons there in England forced the king to sign. And because what they were doing is they were looking to limit the power of the king and the monarchy. Now, the Magna Carta, this is all the way back in 1215. It introduced the ideas of limited government, about the due process of law, about trial by jury. It introduced the idea of the protection of private property and civil liberties. I mean, this thing established that the power of the monarchy was not absolute. In other words, the king, there were rules and there were procedures and there were limits on the king's power. The next was the Petition of Right, written in 1628. Now, 1628, England had a parliament, but the monarchy, or the king, had great power over the people. Now, the king, King Charles I, had asked for more money in taxes for war. And so Parliament saw an opportunity and said, King, we will gladly give you the money for war. However, we will require that you sign this Petition of Right. Now, the Petition of Right established these rights of no cruel punishment inflicted by the king, no excessive bail or fines, the right to bear arms, and the right to petition. The Petition of Right also, according to it, the king could no longer declare martial law in times of peace. He couldn't have the troops go around and force people to do things within the country during times of peace. Nor he could require homeowners to share their homes with the king's troops without permission from the owner. Now, this document required the punishment of any persons to be determined by a judgment of his peers. Hopefully, based on your knowledge, thinking back from U.S. history and your knowledge of the United States Constitution, as well as the Declaration of Independence, you're starting to see some things that should be familiar to you. Now, this petition of right, all the way back in 1628, challenged this divine right theory, and it established that even monarchs were expected to obey the law of the land. So we're starting to see the establishment of rule of law. Next came the English Bill of Rights. This was written in 1689. Now, this was signed by William of Orange after the overthrow of James II in this glorious revolution. If you guys think back to world history, the glorious revolution when William and Mary took over the throne, and it was the reason why they called it the glorious revolution is that no one died. It wasn't a revolution of war. It was an exchange of power. Now, this English Bill of Rights, it granted freedom from royal interference with the law. So the monarchy and the kings and queens could not interfere with the law. It provided freedom from taxation by royal prerogative without the agreement of Parliament. In other words, the monarchy just couldn't impose taxes without the approval of Parliament. It granted freedom to petition the king. It granted freedom to bear arms for self-defense. It granted the freedom to elect the members of Parliament, and it also granted the freedom of speech within Parliament. I mean, people could go in and share their grievances in Parliament. It also granted freedom from cruel and unusual punishments, as well as freedom from fines and forfeitures without trial. There, once again, we see this trial by jury and this due process. And so you're starting to see some familiar things through these three documents. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look and get an idea of how the writings of Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau and Montesquieu and how they impacted our government. Thomas Hobbes, English philosopher, he's considered one of the founders of modern political philosophy. Now, Hobbes described and talked about this state of nature where everybody and all individuals were naturally equal, and everybody was free to do what was necessary for their own survival. He said in the state of nature there are no laws and there's not anybody to enforce laws. Now this, and when you start thinking about it, if it's everybody's in it for themselves and in for their own survival, peace may not necessarily be a consistent thing, and it would be one of those, it really comes down to survival of the fittest. And Hobbes said the only way out of this was to create this supreme power or government to impose peace. What almost an oxymoron for have a government imposed peace. It's almost like saying you will enjoy this and you will like it and you will smile. But nevertheless, Hobbes asserted that people agreed as a part of this creation of a government, and he said that people would have to really lay down their natural rights of equality and freedom to give absolute power to a sovereign or a government, that was the only way that this peace could be imposed. Otherwise, it would go back to this whole survival of the fittest thing. And he said the sovereign could be a person, it could be a group, and that this sovereign or government would make laws to secure a peaceful society, that it would make life, liberty, and property possible. And he called this agreement the social contract. And so now we'll talk about Rousseau's book, The Social Contract, later, but this is what he talked about, and this is back in the early 17th century, is when he came up with this idea of the social contract. Now, Hobbes, in his book, where he talked about all of this, was called Leviathan. And Leviathan, as a book, was in a defense. He wrote it in defense of this absolute power of kings. And now, a quick background, a Leviathan is this mythological sea creature that it devoured and ate entire ships. And what he did was he likened or used this Leviathan as a metaphor for government. I mean, this powerful state government created to impose order and impose peace by making sure that any ship that comes into harbor that might be bringing war or this ship represented by maybe a social idea or concept that would disturb the balance of order would be devoured up by this big giant sea creature. But that's Thomas Hobbes. Now, the next we could talk about is this English philosopher and physician, and probably one of the most influential Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke. And he's often known as the father of liberalism. And he is regarded as the founder of the school of thought known as British empiricism. And his contributions to this modern theories of limited government cannot be overstated. Now, in relation to Hobbes, Locke agreed with Hobbes on the state of nature, and he agreed that people are inherently equal. And he also agreed for this need for what he called social contract. However, he disagreed with Hobbes on 2 points. First, Locke argued that the natural rights, life, liberty, and property existed in a state of nature but could not be taken away. That these are unalienable rights, are impossible to surrender, that they are granted to us for the simple fact that we are human beings, that we breathe and walk, that these are rights that are inherent to us as people, that they should not have to be surrendered. And the fact that they're impossible to surrender. These are our unalienable rights. Now, Locke also disagreed with the social contract and stated that the agreement was not just among the people. In other words, they didn't have to agree just amongst each other, but the agreement also existed between the people and the king. So we're starting to see this limited government, this balance, and this a change or a change in who actually has the power. So king less power, people more power. Locke also stated that the natural rights of the people limited the power of the king. And so we're starting to see this limited government theory, that the king did not have absolute power, and that the king's ultimate role was to protect the natural rights of the citizens. And he said, if this sovereign, if this government, if this king violated these rights, our natural rights as citizens, the rights of life, liberty, and property, that the social contract was broken and the people had the right to revolt and establish a new government. Now, when we're reading over and we listen to, and as you study the Declaration of Independence, you will see that this part is in there. Is that if the government ever becomes destructive in the protection of the individual rights, that we as citizens have the right to overthrow or change or replace that government. Now, Thomas Jefferson used Locke's ideology as a foundation for the Declaration of Independence that we're going to see here in just a minute. And his idea of representative government was also used in the creation of the government of the United States. So John Locke had a significant impact on the government of the United States. Now, the book that he wrote, the 2 treatises of government, where he spoke about all of his political philosophies of what we just talked about. Next is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a Geneva-born Swiss philosopher. Now, check out this quote. He said, "Man is born free, and he is everywhere in chains." Now think about that for a second. What does that actually mean? That when we are born, we're born free. He followed that philosophy of the natural rights and that we have rights as individuals. However, when you see them, he's everywhere in chains. Everywhere he goes, he's restricted by this. He's controlled by this. The government says you can and can't. Geography limitations. And so what he's talking about, he says, while we're born free, everywhere man is in chains. So it's a pretty deep statement, but it's something, if you think about it, it's not too different today. Now, Rousseau had influenced the Enlightenment period. In his book, The Social Contract, that we spoke about this, the theory of social contract, he actually wrote the book, The Social Contract, in 1762. And he said that the citizens should abandon their natural rights in favor of this social contract that requires people to recognize the collective goodwill and represents the common good or the public interest. That we should get rid of our individual rights and look at more of a group, or that we say, we will forego what we desire for the better of the whole. Now, Rousseau believed that direct democracy, with the citizens being the sovereign, was the best form of government. He didn't agree with this idea of representative government. And direct democracy is something that we have talked about, and the fact that, today at the national level, direct democracy is just horribly inefficient and ineffective. There's no way that everybody could vote on everything at the national level. Nothing would ever get done. Rousseau also believed that the actual government would be comprised of these magistrates or officials, and their duty would be to enforce the laws and protect the general welfare of the people. So in other words, that the citizens would be sovereign, but there would be magistrates that would then enforce those laws that the citizens put together. Again, he wrote Social Contract. Last, we have Baron de Montesquieu. Now, this French philosopher and lawyer in 1748 published his greatest work entitled The Spirit of Laws. Now, unlike Hobbes and Locke, he believed that in a state of nature, that individuals were really so fearful that they avoided violence and war. So this thought of survival of the fittest, where everybody was always fighting each other for their own survival, he didn't necessarily agree with that. And he said that people were reluctant to engage in violence and war. He said that this need for food, which we all know we have, caused humans to associate with each other and seek to build a society as opposed to break it down through violence and war. Now, Montesquieu believed that the purpose of government was to maintain law and order. He said he believed that it was also to provide political liberty as well as protect the property of the individual. Montesquieu, he opposed this establishment of an absolute monarchy, and he supported the idea of the king being balanced by the parliament. So again, when we think back about some of the other documents that we've talked about, even Locke and some of his political philosophies, Montesquieu believed that the king should be balanced by parliament. And this even further would be balanced by the creation and the establishment of an independent court system. Now, this is where we first really see the idea of three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. All of them operating independently from one another, but with a system of checks and balances that keeps each in control, keeps each from getting more powerful than the other. And so we see this system of checks and balances and the separation of powers in our government today, and it was built within the Constitution of the United States because this theory became the foundation for our United States Constitution. And once again, Montesquieu wrote his book, The Spirit of Laws, where he talks about the three branches of government, talks about the separation of powers, and talks about how important this checks and balances system has to be to make sure that, again, one branch of government doesn't become more powerful than another. All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to go. You should be familiar with this by now, but go to our blog, my blog, and the class page. Go to mrsearciesblog.wordpress.com. There, I want to make sure that you go and you click on the U.S. government page. If you're not sure where that is, if you see my cursor and the red arrow, it's over there in the left-hand navigation side right at the top. And then once you click on it, I want you to scroll down, and then you are going to see where it says Unit 1. That's what we're in right now. And I want you to look down 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. You'll see where now that is circled. This is the reading of the Declaration of Independence video that we watched in class. And I want you to watch it again. And I want you to think back, now that you've had a chance to read and analyze the documents as well as the political philosophies of those Enlightenment thinkers. And then when you look at all of that, and then now hopefully you will start to see their influence and the influence of those documents within the Declaration of Independence itself. And so you can even look one line up, you'll see the Declaration of Independence text. And if you want to, you've already annotated this and gone through it, you can certainly look at it again. But I encourage you, take another listen and read of the Declaration of Independence, and you will really start to see influences of the documents, the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, the English Bill of Rights, as well as those political philosophers. I hope this has helped. If you have any questions, email me. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you on campus.